Hello, everyone. Welcome to Slasher U. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and we have a brand new segment for you today. And I'm really excited that this is the first installment of this one. We're calling this Covering the U. We're spotlighting those who cover college sports. And with me, I'm very excited to say, is Jack Milko. He covers the St. Bonaventure Bonnies. And if you have heard anything from myself, Slasher U, from my roots, I am a St. Bonaventure Bonnies fan, grew up in Western New York. So I've been following Jack for quite some time, and now I'm really excited to have a conversation with him. Jack, welcome in.
Christian, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Jack. Well, what I'd like to do with this segment is first, before we dig into St. Bonaventure, because there's some really fun things to talk about with this team if you've been paying attention just over the last week. But I'd like to talk about you a little bit first. You are a beat writer for the St. Bonaventure Bonnies on A10 Talk. I've seen you're a Holy Cross graduate and obviously a graduate of the St. Bonaventure Bonnies. Tell me, what got you into writing for the Bonnies, covering the Bonnies, and just into sports writing in general?
Yeah, I got an interesting story. So first off, my dad, Kyle, is a St. Bonaventure graduate. So growing up, my whole family always rooted for the brown and white. And they've been my teams for as long as I can remember. And it's funny because back in high school, I'm originally from Rochester, New York.
Okay.
I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. And so I started calling my high school basketball games via Twitch streams when I was a junior in high school. Nice. Fell in love with it. Had a blast doing so. And then I went on to Holy Cross and did the same thing for the basketball team there too. So that was terrific. Lead play-by-play guy for the Holy Cross Crusaders. Of course, my senior year at Holy Cross was the 1920 season in which HC went 3-29. So you can imagine the agony of being the lead play-by-play guy for that team was. And then, of course, my senior year at Holy Cross, upended by the pandemic, got sent home in March, and I was kind of left with, well, what next? What do we do? What's going on? Job market obviously was not terrific. Mm-hmm. And I really started covering the Bonnies in earnest during the pandemic. I was working as a substitute teacher at my high school and decided to give it a go. And in doing so, St. Bonaventure unveiled this master's program with the Jandoli School of Communication, which is actually completely remote. I'm like, do you know what? We're in a pandemic. I can't go to school anyways. Let's go for it. This is an opportunity that, why not, right? And knowing the distinguished alums that have come out of the Jandoli School, figured, why can't I be the next Adrian Wojnarowski or Mike Vaccaro or whoever, right? And so that led me to this program that I'm currently in. I actually graduate this upcoming May. And what's been great about covering the Bonnies for A10 Talk is not only making connections with other teams, other media members from around the conference, but also with the coaches, players, and staffs affiliated with St. Bonaventure. And my favorite part is taking the skills that I have learned in the Jandoli School of Communication at St. Bonaventure and apply that to my writing, covering the team, covering the Bonnies. It's been really a blessing in disguise. And if you told me 2 years ago today that this is where I'd be amazed.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great story. And you know what? Not surprised that you got that kind of pathway in there, because you can tell that you take your job seriously with your writing and your coverage. You do a really good job across social media. One of the greatest Twitter follows, if you do follow St. Bonaventure Basketball over here, is Jack. And, with A10 Talk, the Atlantic 10, I feel, is such an underrated conference. And we've talked about this a few times on this show, because Steve, as you know, my co-host is a fan of Duquesne and I follow St. Bonaventure. We talk about how the Atlantic 10 is very underrated and there's just so much good basketball. In your words, since you've been just covering them for a few years and you said your father is a St. Bonaventure graduate, you seem like you got some experience here. And being from Rochester, I know you got some experience with Bonaventure. For a team or a college basketball fan that doesn't really know what St. Bonaventure is about, how would you explain the Bonnies basketball to them?
Bonaventure basketball is unique. The entire school rallies around the team. And let me tell you a quick story.
Please.
Last March, St. Bonaventure went to the NIT, which many college basketball pundits, fans, and even coaches alike have kind of disregarded over the past few years. The NIT obviously was very prominent 50, 60 years ago. But Bonaventure had a really roller coaster season last year. Preseason ranked top 25, won the Charleston Classic. then they were upended by injuries and a COVID bug middle of the season, and they didn't meet expectations that were given to them in the preseason. So last March in the NIT, they win at Colorado, they win at Oklahoma, at Virginia, and they end up at Madison Square Garden. The university on a Tuesday morning bussed 8 busloads of students from Allegheny, New York and Western New York, 7 hours down Route 86 to the Garden. And it's one of the greatest sporting spectacles I've seen, to see the entire lower bowl of Madison Square Garden full of Bonnie's fans on a Tuesday night in late March. That's, to me, what Bonaventure basketball is, because it's all about that community aspect. And going back to the connections that I alluded to earlier within the Jandoli School of Communication, that's expanded upon with the whole university, because the Bonaventure connections, relationships is second to none. It's a small university, one of the tiniest schools in all of Division I, but the relationships that are fostered in that little place are just so special. And you see that for the basketball team and the fans that follow it.
Yeah, beautiful campus too. Not a huge campus, but a beautiful campus. You know, you get a chance to walk through it a decent amount when you're getting yourself to the Riley Center. It's just a really good campus. I have fond memories being young and going through there. I mean, I can name, the A10 championship with Andrew Nicholson, J.R. Bremer when I was a kid. Lots of really good basketball when I was younger as well. But St. Bonaventure basketball, completely agree. If you haven't paid attention to them, pay attention to them. And what a perfect time. And let's lean a little bit over and talk about this team just a minute. You covered them. I know you are well versed for this. They just had one of the best wins in, well, at least a pretty decent long time since the NIT, you will. They just upset Notre Dame. No one really thought that was coming. A lot of people were worried about this Bonaventure team this year. A little backstory on that. I'm sure you can fill it in, but a lot of transfers, a lot of graduate transfers that were happening this season. Kyle Lofton and a plethora of other players heading out, going to other big Power 5 schools, Iowa State, Florida, etc. Mike Schmidt did a really good job at bringing in some good players. And there were some issues at the beginning of the season. I think we've seen that so far, but that game against Notre Dame, I think, really changed the mood in that place. What would you feel? What do you think? Do you think that's correct? And then what do you think about overall that Notre Dame game? I loved your coverage on that. You were sitting in the penalty box, you said, of the Islanders. I saw the picture. It's awesome. I'll make sure we put that up here while we're talking. What was your thoughts of that game?
Shock, honestly. Notre Dame came into this game as one of the most experienced teams in the country. They started 4 graduate students. And like you just alluded to, Bonaventure is one of the youngest teams with not a lot of experience. The Bonnies started a couple of freshmen, Kyrell Luke, who actually transferred to Bonaventure from Holy Cross, reigning Patriot League Rookie of the Year. So he's only a sophomore. And then you've got Daryl Banks III, who shined for St. Peter's last March on that Cinderella run to the Elite Eight. He's the oldest guy in the roster, and he's a redshirt junior. So a lot of youth. And the Bonnies had 2 early season losses at Canisius at South Dakota State, where they held a lead down the stretch but couldn't seal the deal. And a lot of that was due to that youth and inexperience, not making the right plays, the right winning plays when he needed to make. And frankly, in all of my pregame columns, I try to analyze the game, break down the matchups, talk about the deficiencies between each team, and I make a prediction on what I think is going to happen. I thought it was going to be a close game, and I thought Notre Dame was going to win based on what I saw against Canisius and South Dakota State, with just unfortunate turnovers, poor shot selection, not securing the rebound when they really needed to. But instead, Bonaventure came out and dominated all 40 minutes wire to wire. One of the most impressive wins I've seen from a Mark Schmidt team in a long time. They really took it to the Irish, and Mike Bray was kind of dumbfounded in his post-game press conference, saying that we just got flat out outworked. And that's saying something, considering Bray's pedigree.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that win by St. Bonaventure over Notre Dame. This is something that you really love to see, an A10 team winning against an ACC opponent. An opponent, as you said, very experienced. And, it only takes 5 or 6 games for this team to really turn things around. That's awesome. I don't know why I even doubted Mike Schmidt in the first place, or even had some thought that he wouldn't be able to find these guys to come in. We've seen it for a very long time. He's really been able to put a good squad on the court for the Bonnies. Speaking of this Atlantic 10, Jack, we look at a team like Dayton, which is ranked in the top preseason, top 25. They really haven't turned out to be great so far this season. Obviously, it's very early. There's plenty of things to take over. St. Louis has looked decent, but they have had some losses to some big teams. St. Bonaventure was, I think, preseason ranked 7th, if I believe, and they
10th.
found their 10th, even worse, right? So they found their way higher up into this standpoint, and we're seeing Rhode Island and Duquesne currently sitting in the top right now. So obviously things are going to shake out. We're not going to end up where we're ending right now, although I think Duquesne does look better so far this season. Your thoughts on this Atlantic 10 right now, because the month of December is probably the truly last month before we get into Atlantic 10 play, one of the conferences that kind of starts earlier than most. Beginning of the season in January, we're going to get some good Atlantic 10 basketball. St. Bonaventure, they have a shot to make some noise in this conference this year. Was 10th and complete understatement. I'm throwing you a whole bunch of questions, but do what you can here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're asking all the right questions. I'll answer your last question first.
Mm-hmm.
The preseason pick 10th. Problem is nobody knew what this team was going to look like.
It's fair.
And last year, St. Bonaventure was picked first in the preseason poll unanimously, and things didn't shape out the way they wanted to. I think historically under Schmidt, Bonaventure teams always do better when they're off the radar. They're the underdog. This is certainly not a team I would want to play in February. Absolutely not, especially in the Riley Center, who Jay Billis dubbed one of the toughest places to play in America.
Mm-hmm.
But as for St. Louis, Dayton, VCU, some of the other top dogs in the conference, I know Davidson's off to a nice start. Dayton, unfortunately, suffered a couple injuries. I just saw Malachi Smith and Kobe Elvis are both on crutches, which is not a good thing for the Flyers. And Dayton just went 0-3 in the Hounds. And all Atlantic 10 fans should be somewhat concerned because in the non-conference, every A10 fan should be rooting for their other teams in their own league, right? Because the conference needs at least 2 or 3 bids in the NCAA tournament. It's a tide that lifts all boats, and that tournament revenue helps each university, whether it's LaSalle, whether it's Duquesne, Bonaventure, St. Louis, and now Loyola Chicago, who is the 15th member in the A10 beginning this year. So it's been a really tough start for the A10 as a whole. St. Louis got trounced by Maryland. They lost a close one to Auburn this past weekend. But I really like the Billikens to win the A10 come March. I think they've got the most experienced team. I also think they have the best point guard in the country in Yuri Collins. He currently leads the conference in assists, averaging over 10 per game. And plus, they get Javante Perkins back, who tore his ACL in October 2021, but decided to come back to try and bring SLU not only an A10 title, but perhaps a deep run in late March in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. So what do you think about Bonaventure? How do you feel they look going into the A10? I know obviously we at the beginning with the preseason, you know exactly what to expect of this team. Now we're starting to get that shaked out a little bit after 6 games, 4-2 record. Haven't lost at home yet, which is great. And I don't expect them to have many home losses because, as you mentioned, the Riley Center might be small. It might not be one of those big stadiums, but it doesn't sound like that. And you can even hear it when you're watching on CBS Sportsnet or ESPN Plus, whatever the case, ESPN2, whatever the case it may be. This Bonaventure team, I feel like they have that ability. And just like you said, they don't want to play them in February. They could be one of those sneaky teams that have that Cinderella run for an A10 bid.
Absolutely. And their 3-point shooting has been streaky thus far, but over their past 3 games, all of which they've won, they've been lights out from beyond the arc. And if they can play a better team and have their shooters perform, they could take on anybody in the A10. And the big boys that I alluded to earlier, I would not want to play this Bonaventure team. Schmidt's got one of the deepest playbooks out of any coach in the country. He's an X's and O's guru. He's also plays that pack line defense, which is tough for new offenses to adjust to. Mm-hmm. Although some of the more experienced A10 teams have obviously more experience against that. With that said, this Bonaventure team going into the A10, this morning on A10 Talk, the staff released its weekly power rankings, and Bonaventure got up to 7th. They were kind of in 10-11 first couple weeks of the season, but I think that win over Notre Dame gave people some optimism about the Bonnies. A lot of people were talking about them going into the first round pillow fight, as some Atlantic 10 pundits refer to it as, which is the first round of the A10 tournament. But I don't think the Bonnies are going to be in the first round. They'll be somewhere in my opinion, between 5 and 9. I think 5 might be a real stretch. But even before the season on the A10 Talk podcast, I predicted Bonaventure to finish between 7th and 9th. They're going to have some big wins, but they're also going to have some frustrating losses because of that youth and inexperience that I alluded to. Sometimes the ball is not going to bounce their way. Coach Schmidt often says that jump shots are fickle. Sometimes they'll fall, sometimes they won't. That's just the way it is. Sometimes you get the right call, sometimes you don't get the right call with the whistle. But yeah, I think there should be more optimism right now coming off the big win over the Irish than what there was going into opening night on November 7th against St. Francis.
I love it. One more question before I get you out of here. With the brand new atmosphere and scene, if you will, of NIL and the transfer portal, Bonaventure, obviously a small school. With the Atlantic 10, it is like the step up between Power 5 or Power 6, if you want to call it, and the lower levels, mid-major, if you will. The Atlantic 10 is one of the top mid-majors. However, with Bonaventure being such a small school, do you see these new transfers sticking around, even though they're young and experienced, staying around and building like we saw with that crew in years past with Lofton and the rest of the crew, Walsh and things like that? Or do you see this as another landing spot for them to potentially move on into a big Power 5 that we saw with these guys as grad transfers, but maybe possibly sooner?
Christian, that's $1 million question that I wish I knew the answer to. I was actually talking with a gentleman today, and he even said that we have no idea where we'll be in the spring. And unfortunately, coaches are now building teams for the season, not for their program, due to the new transfer portal and NIL rules. But I will tell you this, and talking with Coach Schmidt at Atlantic 10 Media Day at the Barclays Center, he said his new philosophy is finding kids at lower levels that have had success. And they don't necessarily want the big money, but they want to compete, they want to learn, and they want to get better. And those are the type of diamonds in the rough that Schmidt has found over and over again. Whether it's Andrew Nicholson, way back when in 2008 when Schmidt recruited him. Nicholson tore his right knee in high school, and he had Power 5 recruits coming after him. And as soon as that knee injury occurred, they all left. Bonaventure was the only one standing. He turns into the 2012 Atlantic 10 Player of the Year, right? So you have Jalen Adams, who didn't get a Division I scholarship coming out of college, ends up at Bonaventure, great 4-year career, leads the Bonnies to the 2018 NCAA tournament. And now with this team, you've got Daryl Banks III, who succeeded at St. Peter's, a lower level in the MAC conference. Kyrell Luke, same thing at Holy Cross. You've got Chad Venning, the big guy in the paint, who's had a remarkable 3 games. If you haven't watched a Bonaventure game yet, go watch Chad Venning's highlights from the past 3 games. His post moves inside have been phenomenal, but he played at Morgan State. So Schmidt's always done a great job of finding these diamonds in the rough. Like I said earlier, trying to find guys that are in lower conferences that have had success to not only help the Bonnies, but help themselves going forward.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much. Jack, thank you once again for breaking in this brand new program with me, covering the U here on Slasher U, spotlighting those who cover college sports. And I feel like we spotlighted yourself in Bonaventure. Fantastic. Before I let you go, please let everyone know where they can find you, what you got coming up, and obviously plug anything away over at A10 Talk, anything. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Christian. First and foremost, go Bonnies. They've been a tremendous supporter for my work, and I've really enjoyed pursuing a master's in sports journalism. Like I said at the onset of this show, I could never imagine where I've been today, the people I've met, the things I've learned. And I'm truly humbled and blessed to have that opportunity. And that's all thank you to my wonderful family, who always has believed in me no matter what. And then you can always find me on Twitter at Jack_Milko. And my work is published at A10Talk.com as well as at A10 Talk on Twitter. Thanks so much, Christian. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. All that stuff where you can find Jack will be in the show notes below, in descriptions with links and everything. Click on those, read his articles, hit a follow. If you like college basketball, I encourage you to get into the Atlantic 10, especially with the Bonaventure Bonnies. They're going to be a name. Keep paying attention to them, because I'm telling you what, this Bonaventure team is real fun. Again, thank you so much to Jack Milko once again. Thank you for listening to our first edition of Covering the U. We'll be back here with another episode here on Slasher U.